A reading from Luke chapter 23. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they cast lots to divide his clothes. And the people stood by watching, but the leaders scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself, as if he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine, and saying, "If you are the King of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. While the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two, then Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." Having said this, he breathed his last. It's not only the cross, but the path there we remember today. Jesus was betrayed, put on trial, he was mocked, he was beaten. They intentionally tried to humiliate him. In the garden the night of his arrest, he prayed that this cup might pass. Luke says, in his anguish he prayed, and his sweat became like drops of blood. We give a lot of attention to the physical toll of these final days on Jesus. But what about the mental? Blood-like sweat falls from an anxious body, an anxious mind, and a heavy heart racked with a rock in your stomach. That's where these prayers come from. When he prays for this cup to pass, he prays with gritted teeth and shortness of breath. These are prayers of panic. We tend to want to skip past all of this, to brush it away, and we might think, well, he's God, right? So he knew what was going to happen. He had a goal in mind, right? To die for my sins, and he knew that he would be resurrected. Well, let's remember that Jesus is fully divine and fully human. And the human experience is one of existential vulnerability. To know what's going to happen all the time and understand life after death clearly, well, that's not part of the human experience. And it actually diminishes that experience. The old hymn from Philippians 2 reminds us that he emptied himself. Being found in human form, he humbled himself. So, in the cross and the journey there, he walks the same path as those who prayed through a panic attack. He's felt the same rush of shame that drowns our heart and gut when we're humiliated. He knows despair. And he knows the feeling of being passed off from one bureaucrat to the next. We want to free him of this. We want to believe he doesn't feel it or fear it. We want to believe that he didn't really die, that he had some kind of advance information. He must have known. He must not have felt what the other criminals next to him felt. But there's no consolation in the place of the skull before Sunday morning. There's only final breaths. Carlisle Marney used to preach through the week on Holy Week. One year he got to the end of the week, on Good Friday, and he had heard the people complain and groan throughout the week, saying, "Look, these sermons are too depressing." Jesus told his disciples they would rise, right? They must have imagined these things. And Martin would say, yes, but they nor we can imagine such things before they happen, even if we've heard them. And Marnie told the crowd on Good Friday, "I hear you expecting me to bootleg resurrection before Calvary." But he says this, "If you put resurrection into Holy Week, you empty atonement because you destroy incarnation." We're embarrassed of the humanity, the limitation. We long for God to be in control. And Good Friday lets us down. The glory of the good news is richly textured in earthy hues, and we shrink against that reality. But we have to believe in the death first before we believe in the new life. Because if we just skip to the new life now, we might never enter the shadow of the valley of death that grows our compassion for spreading life and light now. Without walking through Holy Week, we might be more prone to wash our hands of the struggles of the earth, just like Pilate did. Because Jesus was passed from principality to principality. Each had the chance to save him, and none did. And we might wonder if this truly happened that way, but we should know this truly happens that way still. Good Friday was not the last time an innocent person was condemned to die, because another dark day approaches. On April 27, Melissa Lucio will be executed by the state of Texas. Lucio was convicted for the death of her 2-year-old in 2007. However, since then, new evidence has come out, a coerced confession, a defense attorney now in jail for corruption, pathologists now rejecting the conclusions from 2007 that it was abuse that led to homicide, and now 5 of the jurors are asking for a retrial. Cameron Vickery was in Austin this week for a meeting of the Texas Legislature's Committee on Criminal Justice Reform, and she sat right across the aisle from the Lucio family and watched as a modern-day Pontius Pilate washed his hands of the responsibility for the possible death of an innocent person. Republican Jeff Leach and Democrat Joe Moody and the whole committee exhibited great compassion and commitment to doing the right thing and to pursuing justice. But District Attorney Syons from Cameron County tried to pass the buck. Syons didn't know when the execution date was. It's 12 days away. Syons said he didn't know if he had the power to unilaterally withdraw the warrant for execution. He does. Syons said even if he could intervene, that he shouldn't, because that's the role of the courts. This coming from a representative of the courts. He said he hasn't reviewed the new evidence because it's not sworn testimony. Okay. He said it's common for jurors to change their minds and called it buyer's remorse. When asked if it was more important to have a sense of finality and to just move things along rather than to be sure justice is done, well, he replied by misappropriating a quote from MLK saying, "Justice delayed is justice denied." He could void that execution warrant today, but instead, Melissa Lucio spends Good Friday in solitary confinement. The state puts everyone it executes into solitary confinement for 30 days. Why? You know why. Cameron called Syons' office 3 weeks ago, asking if the DA could withdraw, pause, or delay her execution date. She said, "No, I don't think so. That has to come from the BPP." So Cameron called the Board of Pardons and Paroles, and they said, "No, I don't think we can really do anything about that. You'll have to call the Board General Counselor's office." So she called the General Counselor's office. She asked if this is where she could direct others in their advocacy. Is this a list that will be passed on to the actual decision makers in Melissa Lucio's clemency? She needs to check about that, and never got a call back. Cameron said later, "It seems to me like our entire Texas criminal justice system is as confused as I am about who does what and who actually bears responsibility. Or maybe no human being can actually bear the responsibility of executing another human being. So maybe we shouldn't be in the business of putting anyone in that position at all, ever again." I can't imagine what Melissa and her family are going through, but I imagine they know what it's like to pray through blood-like sweat as Jesus did. For some, Good Friday is a little more real this year. And yes, there's foreshadowing in the Gospels that points to resurrection, but you have to go through the cross first. And if we're going to be resurrection people this year, we may have to go to the place of the skull for ourselves first. God goes into the heart of human sin, the systems of corruption, to make us see it for what it is. Gregory of Nazianzus said back in the 4th century, "What has not been assumed has not been healed. It is what is united to his divinity that is saved. Trampling down death by death, death is united to divinity by a violent world. But God refuses to leave us alone. We scapegoat God only to find ourselves in the dark. And what is united on the cross is corruption, despair, betrayal, and shame. The overwhelming mystery of the cross must be faced, taken up, or else it swallows us whole. But as we look to the cross, we might begin to see the crosses around us. We say the disciples abandoned him, but that's only partially true. Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Susanna, Mary, the mother of James, and a few others are there. The women who have followed him since Galilee and supported him all along the way are right there at the cross. They're powerless to do anything, but they were there. And presence is powerful. Their presence was a form of resistance to Pilate and Herod and to any others who sought to silence Jesus and his movement. And we might see our own Marys and Joannas and the others near us, near these crosses. Then we can remember we are not alone, even on a dark Friday. The solidarity of suffering reminds us we are not alone. The Lord comes into his kingdom hanging from a tree. The Lord reigns from the executioner's chambers, because the final word is mercy. You know, there's an old story about a custodian of a small church in rural Louisiana. George was married to Alice, and together they had 6 children. Well, one afternoon, Alice, at 34 years old, was hanging wash and laundry up in the backyard and dropped dead of a heart attack. One of the church elders, who was a friend, upon hearing of the death, wanted to be with George. And when he arrived, George was stretched out on the bed, staring at the ceiling, numb. His friend said nothing, but instead just pulled up a rocking chair and sat down by the bed. And he lit up a cigar and began to rock. George drifted into a soul-soothing sleep as night fell. Later, George recounted how on the day Alice died, he awoke in the dark and instinctively reached out for her, reached out for Alice, but she wasn't there. And when he touched that empty side of the bed, he was stabbed awake by the agony of his lostness and loneliness. And just as the pain became unbearable, George said he caught in the corner of his eye an arcing red glow, the movement of his friend's lit cigar as he rocked quietly. Mary, Joanna, Mary, Susanna, they show us how to be disciples, to be present in pain. It's as if, as Jesus is transitioning from life on the cross, from life to death, he's already passing on to his followers what they need to carry on. They are becoming what he is. The Lord assumes that frailty, and they assume the solidarity of suffering, a solidarity which is the gift of God to those who suffer. The great Emmanuel, the one who sees, the one who hears the cries of the slaves and comes to bring them up on eagle's wings. God is with us in the dark. He assumes everything and brings wholeness to our brokenness. The local poet Naomi Shihab says it best: before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows, and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore.